Yes, good morning, all colleagues here in Bangkok and in India, in New York, and Asia Pacific region to this press briefing on the launch of UN Women's flagship publication, Progress of the World's Women, 2015-2016, Transforming Economies, Realizing Rights. Colleagues, as you know from the press release that was sent out, the report of progress was launched yesterday in London by the UN Women's Executive Director, Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, and it has also been launched in a number of cities globally, in Mexico, in Sydney, Australia, in Alexandria, in Egypt, and in fact, this is the last of the first series of publication of progress. And so we're very happy to have with us online from New York one of the main authors of the report, Ms. Shahra Razavi, who is the Chief of Research and the Data Section at UN Women and also Research Director of this flagship publication, Progress of the World's Women. She is a well-recognized academic with recent publications including the title, The Global Crisis and Transformative Social Change. And she's also done a lot of work on counting women's unpaid work, as well as valuing women's work in the economy. And you have for you her brief biography for your consumption. So Shahra will be speaking to the main findings of the report and to the main recommendations to transform the economies in ways in which there's equitable participation and benefit globally, regionally, and nationally. Also with us online is Dr. Jayati Ghosh, who is a professor of economics at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. She has been the Executive Secretary of International Development Economics Associates, an international network of heterodox development economists, and she's the founding trustee of the Economic Research Foundation. She was a technical advisor to the UN Women's publication, and we are very happy for her participation this morning in the press briefing, and she will be speaking more specifically to the relevance and resonance of the findings of the report as well as the recommendations to the Asia-Pacific region. And finally with us, we also have Mr. Francisco Cos-Montiel, who is UN Women's Economic Empowerment Advisor for the Asia-Pacific region. He is again himself an academic with involvement in research programs aimed at generating evidence on women's economic empowerment, gender equality, and economic growth in Asia. And so, without further ado, I'm going to ask Shahra to give us her reflections on the contents of the progress, on the advancements made to ensure women's empowerment and economic activity, but also on the persistent challenges of inequalities globally and as well as in the Asia-Pacific region. Shahra, can you perhaps take us through the main findings and recommendations of the report?
Shahra. Shahra.
Shahra?
Here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to the thing. So maybe I'll leave the video off so that we can have better audio.
Thank you.
Okay, so I was going to, first of all, thank you, Roberta, for having given us the opportunity to be virtually with you, and thanks to other colleagues who have made this connection possible. We were very pleased here in New York. We were able to launch the report today, and as you know, the report was also launched in London, where the executive director was present. So let me quickly take you through some of the key issues that the report deals with and some of the recommendations that come out of the report. I think the report, Progress of the World's Women 2015-2016, and sort of asks three really burning questions, which it tries to answer, drawing on the existing evidence and research on the issues that have been carried out globally. And we were very lucky to have a number of very rich background papers, 30-odd background papers that we commissioned, as well as having the guidance and advice and inputs of a distinguished advisory group, of which Professor Jayati Ghosh was a member, of course. And so it really is a collective effort. And we were very lucky also to have extensive comments and feedback from colleagues across the UN, as well as from academics who are outside the UN and civil society organizations with whom we're in touch and who acted as peer reviewers for our chapters. So we went through rounds and rounds of revisions and trying to sort of make sure that the analysis was really doing justice to the richness of the evidence and the analysis that various colleagues were bringing to these issues. So first, let me say what were the three key questions that the report was asking. First, our question was, how far have we come in achieving gender equality in the area of women's sort of economic and social rights? So more specifically focusing on those issues, the right to a decent job, the right to social protection, the right to having access to decent care services, water and sanitation. These were the key questions that the report was asking. So a kind of report card on where we're at. And secondly, how can economic policies become an effective lever for eliminating the disconnect that still persists between the kind of human rights principles and women's rights principles to which many governments have committed themselves and women's actual concrete enjoyments of those rights on the ground, what we call substantive equality. And the third question was, with this agenda and these policy levers that we're proposing, are countries actually able to move forward with this alternative economic agenda? Is it possible? In response to the first question, the report shows that progress has too often been very slow and extremely uneven, not only across regions and countries, but also within countries we see huge inequalities among women as well. So while there has been rapid progress in expanding women's access to education, and also we see some progress in enshrining gender equality in laws, gender inequalities remain persistent in a number of domains, including, very importantly, the fact that gender gaps in labor force participation remain wide. I mean, globally, the figure that we have is 26.4% gap in terms of the difference between men's and female and women's labor force participation. Occupational segregation remains a universal fact across the world, regardless of the level of income and the type of economy that we have, with women overrepresented in clerical and support positions and service and sales work, but underrepresented in managerial occupations. In developing countries in particular, the bulk of women's work remains within the informal economy, that is without any kind of security or social protection. And globally, women earn on average 24% less than men. And the gap widens when women have children. Of equal significance, women do nearly 2.5 times more unpaid care and domestic work than men. When paid and unpaid work are combined, in most countries, women, in nearly all countries, I should say, women work longer hours than men. And in most countries, women are less likely than men to contribute to a pension scheme and to receive an old age pension. And even where they do receive an old age pension, in terms of the quantity, the adequacy of the pension, there's a significant gap. Women's rates of lower rates of labor force participation, the lower pay, the weaker access to pensions and other social protection instruments, all of these factors accumulate to produce large lifetime income gaps. And we have this data which was put together for only a select number of countries, but it's quite telling. So in France and Sweden, for example, women can expect to earn 31% less than men over their lifetimes. In Germany, the percentage of what women earn is 49% less than men, almost half of what men earn. And in Turkey, an average woman can expect to earn just 25% of what an average man will earn. So there's a 75% gap in lifetime income. So this was kind of with the report gives in greater detail a report card on some of the sort of main gaps that we made. Then on the second question, in terms of what can be done, what needs to be done if the economy is to really expand women's and men's rights and opportunities, real opportunities, and not just opportunities on paper, then we can see that things will need to change quite drastically. And today, with this report, in fact, what is being demanded is a pretty new economic agenda, one that works for women, but that will benefit all of society. So in terms of what this agenda would look like, I think what the report does is that it goes beyond the kind of providing a report card of the gaps and the limited progress and the huge inequalities that remain in place to propose a kind of alternative agenda. And here we have three elements that the report highlights, which really need to work in tandem, and none of them can stand on its own. If we want real transformation, we need to see a combination of these three elements. So the first element that the report highlights, it's the importance of transforming paid and unpaid work to make it empowering for women. We need decent jobs for women, by which we mean jobs that provide safe working conditions, equal pay for work of equal value, the ability to support oneself and one's family, and to save for older age. And we start by naming jobs that women are already doing of better quality. Millions of women in developing countries make their living through small-scale subsistence farming, for example, or small-scale farming in general, subsistence and cash crop farming. And we can make their jobs more decent by ensuring that they have control over the land that they farm, that they have access to credit, so they can buy the various inputs that are needed to make their land more productive, and that there are markets that can be accessible for small-scale farmers who produce, on a small scale, and that these markets can be there and accessible for women farmers. The issue of formalizing women's informal work comes out very strongly in the report, whether we refer to domestic workers or to street traders, vendors, or to waste pickers, huge numbers of which, for example, in domestic work, 83% of all domestic workers in the world are women. And there's been a lot of movement in terms of legalizing and trying to formalize domestic workers' rights, but a lot of work remains to be done beyond the important ILO convention in terms of really taking it to the ground and making it happen and making those rights real. As well as transforming paid work, the report also pays quite a lot of attention to the need to support and transform unpaid work. Clearly, if women and girls stopped doing the kind of unpaid work that nurtures young children, other adults, and other members of the household into productive and creative human beings, there would be no labor force to speak of, and the whole global economy would grind to a halt. We need this kind of unpaid work. It's absolutely essential. We must end the kind of drudgery that goes with it. And particularly for lower income agrarian economies, where drinking water, sanitation is inaccessible, and where fetching of water that women and girls do for their households takes a huge toll on their time, as well as their bodies, as well as their rights to education, their right to access work, their right to self-care, all of the time that has to go into it. The absence of these kind of easily accessible public utilities, if you like, must end, and the fact that investments can be made in this sector can actually reduce the drudgery of this work. We must also support the unpaid care work better through public services, which are really a lifeline for many women, for the majority of working women, but also make an effort to distribute this work more fairly between women and men within households. But also the global society needs to take a greater share of responsibility for this through the provision of accessible public services. Which takes me to the second component of our proposed agenda, the need to strengthen social protection and social services. And we use the term social protection in the way that it's been used in the sort of work that the ILO has been doing around the social protection floor, including within it both the social transfers as well as social services, both of which are essential. We need to absolutely end the scandal of women's poverty in older age, which is becoming a really serious issue, not only in high-income countries, but also in many middle-income and lower-income countries as well. Contributory pension systems, as difficult as it is, need to expand their reach beyond those who work in the formal economy. This is not easy, but some countries are taking steps to include some informal workers within the contributory pension systems by having the state also contribute instead of the employers in cases where informal workers are self-employed. Within these contributory systems, we can have care credits, which will at least make sure that women are not penalized for taking time out of their sort of paid work in order to care for, at least for children. So these care credits can be very important in terms of equalizing and at least trying to compensate for some of the time that is lost and which is not counted as far as contributory pension systems are concerned. But equally importantly, we need social pensions, again, many examples of which have been tried around the world, in order to reach all of those people who cannot avail of a pension through the contributory system. Equally important, investing in social services is critical, and in fact we show in the report that it can even have a stronger impact on women's poverty. So public services, I mean, if there's one soundbite that should come out of this report, is the importance of public services that are accessible and of good quality. It is a real lifeline for many working families and for many working women in particular who cannot access the services that are available through the market. Investing in quality services, health, childcare, elderly care, we also argue has a triple dividend. It will meet the care needs of those who need care, whether it's children, whether it's the elderly, whether it's people who are sick. So there's a real dividend there in terms of enhancing people's well-being. Also, it can reduce the unpaid care work that is carried out within households, not by completely substituting for it, but by being a helpful complement. And also, if we really think about it, expanding and investing in quality care services can also become an engine for employment generation. Globally, we know that something like 10.3 million additional health workers are needed if we want to ensure the effective delivery of universal health care, the majority in Asia and Africa. And if you add to this the millions of jobs that can be created to deliver childcare and elderly care services, there's a huge potential there. And many lessons from around the world in terms of how these care services can be financed and delivered if they are to meet both the care needs of those who need the service, but also if they're going to meet the needs of those who provide these services, the care workers themselves. Now, to end, a third and really essential component of the proposed agenda is the need for an enabling macroeconomic environment. And I think this is something that Sayati Ghosh can elaborate on, much more authoritatively than I can do in the time that we have. But I really do want to emphasize that in the report we underline the critical importance of fiscal policies and the fact that governments can expand the revenues needed for investments in social protection and social services by improving the efficiency of tax collection, by expanding the tax base, by reprioritizing spending to ensure better outcomes in terms of gender equality. But also, we think that there's a lot of room for, there's a lot of space for expanding fiscal revenues through a better kind of mobilization of resources through, for example, corporations who need to really pay their fair share. We know that, for example, the annual tax revenues that are lost to developing countries due to trade mispricing alone by these multinational corporations has been estimated by the WHO to be between 98 and 106 billion US dollars a year. Now, this is a huge amount of money, which is $20 billion more than the annual capital cost needed to achieve universal and sanitation coverage. So we're talking about, huge sums of money there, a lot of wealth that's around, which if it can be reallocated and properly mobilized would really enable many governments to kind of meet the critical social rights and economic rights that their citizens and their residents are entitled to. Similarly, monetary policies also can be essential for expanding real economic activities, employment, incomes of various kinds. Monetary policy really needs to incorporate additional targets beyond a narrow focus on reducing inflation. So there's a lot of change and a lot of possibilities in terms of having macroeconomic policies that really can sustain the kind of changes that the report is calling for, both in terms of transforming paid and unpaid work and in terms of making social protection and social services universal. These things cannot be sustained if we stick to the kind of very conventional macroeconomic policies that have been dominant. But we need to work in tandem, and without the kind of macroeconomic policies that can provide the fiscal revenues and can actually generate the kind of jobs and economic opportunities that we think are essential, then the other two elements will not be sustainable. So it's important that we really put all three sets of issues together. And then finally, the question that is often asked, is this doable, especially for developing countries? And the short answer, I think, in the report is that these policy alternatives are not coming out of an abstract. It's not an abstract agenda coming out of a textbook. They're based on actually existing alternatives that have been tried and tested around the world, especially in the developing world. And in fact, in a period when developed countries, high-income countries, particularly in Europe as well as elsewhere, have gone into more austerity and sort of retrogression in terms of rights that were fought for over many decades by women's movements, by civil society organizations, by trade unions. What we have seen in developing countries, although again it's very uneven, but there has been a lot of experimentation around both social policies as well as economic policies. So the alternatives that are being suggested are not just, something abstract. It's not a pipe dream. It's coming out of actually existing alternatives. In Brazil, for example, has used very effectively minimum wage policies to reduce the gender wage gap. And as in this case, as well as many other cases, the evidence shows that this does not have a dampening effect on employment generation. It's not something that is costly, and it's going to shrink the number of jobs that can be created, as was previously argued. That argument does not really seem to hold anymore, and so that's, I think, good news. Also, the kind of universal social pensions or social pensions that are more inclusive, they have been tried. At least in 100 countries worldwide now have some form of social pension. Botswana and Bolivia are among those that have eliminated the gender pension gap by using a social pension, which is financed in this case through money generated through mineral rents. But also we see in countries in East Asia and the Pacific, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's Latin America in particular, quite a lot of significant progress in terms of expanding early childhood education and care services. So that's again something that is happening. So the bottom line of this report, the bottom line argument is that making women's economic and social rights a reality is not only a right thing to do ethically in terms of what governments have committed themselves to do in letter, and therefore they need to move on with this agenda. It's also absolutely doable. And in fact, it's something that can actually be good in terms of economic dynamism as well.
Thank you, Shara. Thank you, Shara.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so you have really outlined very well that the progress has been uneven between and within countries, and also the agenda for the need for transformative work, for social protection, social services, and for macroeconomic policy that is well aligned with the role of the state for redistribution of development benefits. So Jayoti, we are going to ask you if you can perhaps reflect on how that analysis of the advance or the progress, as well as the recommendations apply to the Asia-Pacific region and perhaps South Asia more in particular. Over to you, Jayati. Okay, so let's...
Cannot hear you.
Okay, great. Jayati, can you speak now?
You need to unmute her.
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Can you? Okay, good. Yes, I think Shara has already given an excellent and very comprehensive summary of what I think is a really good and potentially path-breaking report. I think we really have to see in the Asian context, many of the points that are being made are actually even more important, because in much of Asia, we've actually seen not just inadequate progress, but in some cases, possibly even a deterioration in certain significant indicators. In South Asia, in my own country, in India, we've had a decline in the recognized workforce participation and an expansion of the gender wage gap, which was unexpected and undesirable. But in a number of other countries, including in Southeast Asia, the early and massive increase in women's labor force participation has not actually been sustained, and we've seen a decline and a deterioration in many of these areas. We've also had other kinds of, shall we say, the substantive equality not being met or not being generated, whether it's in terms of increasing violence against women, expressed in all kinds of things, in a declining sex ratio, in continued violence over the life cycle. And certainly the inadequate social protection plays a very, very important role in all of this. So the diagnosis, if anything, is even sharper for the Asia-Pacific region, and the proposals are absolutely essential. What I particularly like about this report is that it recognizes that to improve the conditions of women, you actually have to address the matter at its root. You have to look at macroeconomic and growth policies. You have to look at monetary fiscal policies, of course. You have to look at social policies. But when you do that, you're actually going to make things better for society as a whole. It's not just a gender-specific thing. It's not just that doing these is going to be something that affects only women. It's actually going to make for not just more just, but pleasanter and actually better societies for everybody. There are a couple of specifics I would like to take up. One is the point that Shara just made about social protection being an absolutely essential feature. And in some countries in Asia, Nepal, which we know now is reeling under this terrible earthquake, and we really extend our solidarity to everyone there. But in Nepal, they had actually introduced universal social pensions for men and women, which even at a low level has made a huge difference in terms of providing some minimum income security to especially older women who, as Shara said, are typically denied. But this is something we really have to fight for across the board. And it's found that it is really very affordable. The idea that it's something you can't afford, that it's poor societies can't do this, is completely wrong, as can be seen quite easily. The idea that it's fine to just increase workforce participation, again, is something which is problematic, as we've seen, because it depends so much on the wages, on the conditions, on the security of such work, and on the safety and the work environment. And I think these are areas where we have really neglected the problem in South Asia. We have seen labor markets as basically anything that increases women's workforce participation is good, no matter what the quality of that work or the remuneration of that work. So I think this focus on improving decent work for women and the important argument that it can be done, as Latin America shows, that you can formalize more and more women's work, including domestic work. You can provide social security to many informal sector workers. You can actually ensure that more and more of women's work is actually good quality work. I think these are very, very important points that we need to take on board.
Thank you very much, Jayati. Thank you very much, Shara. Now we maybe open up for one or two questions from the press if there are any. And we also have some questions from our bloggers online. Sir, do you have a question for clarification?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We are observing. It's good to hear from your side, and we are.
Yes. Okay, so we have two questions from the bloggers in Pakistan.
My name is Sajid Iqbal, and I'm managing editor of Independent Press International, recognized news agency from Pakistan. So we are observing today, and you will get many articles from my side. So we have a document everything. She delivered the speech. There was no thing to question. It was a very open speech. So no use to question.
Okay. Thank you.
We are very agree with it.
Thank you. So, Shara and Jayati, from our youth blogger, Faisha Khan in Pakistan. She wants to know, how will we make sure about the implementation of this report in underdeveloped countries and in Pakistan in particular? Are there action points that you want to perhaps direct the press's attention to?
Excuse me.
Okay, let me begin by, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Let me begin by saying that I completely understand the concern of this young woman blogger, because at least in South Asia at the moment, it feels like we're going backwards rather than forwards. And I can understand that there's often a sense of despair in terms of how to actually implement all of these things, which together sound almost utopian. I think it's important to think about it in terms of the thin end of the wedge. Think of the things that we can demand, which are not going to cost very much, which are not going to appear threatening, and yet will create a momentum for much wider change. I do believe universal pensions is one of these things. As we've said, even in Nepal, you can implement it in rural areas and in a way which is not damaging to the public budget. So supposing we pick on specific things, relatively small to begin with, and see how we can expand that. So if we start demanding right now in Pakistan formalization of all women's work, it's obviously not going to work, because we know that most work in South Asia is informal, and men and women are facing huge informality in the labor markets. So we begin by asking for things that can be done, like a universal pension, like slightly better conditions for domestic work, for a minor regulation. I'm saying minor because we need much, much more. But let's not begin by asking for it. Begin by asking for things which we can fight for and we can achieve, and then keep hoping to expand it. Thin end of the wedge, really.
Thank you. Shara, do you have anything you want to add? If not, we have a question from our colleague from Independent Press. Please go ahead, sir.
Well, I have a different question. I'm sorry for that. I'm from Pakistan, as you know. The lady from Pakistan, India, and many parts of the world, they are not allowed to work, they are not allowed to drive a car, and they are in a very critical condition, especially in Islamic countries. Islam never says this, but few uneducated people engage in Islamic countries, and they are creating the problem, especially for the women. Do you have any idea how to develop the women in my country? I mean India, Pakistan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia never allow lady to drive the vehicle. So this is not good practice for the coming century. You know. I'm sorry, I can explain my question or not, please.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think it's terrible that, in fact, women across Asia and across many parts of the world, and it's not just Islamic countries, it's in even in parts of India, there are other religions which actually impose all kinds of patriarchal restrictions on women. It's not something we can overturn in a day, but once again, I believe we have to look at the thin end of the wedge problem, and we have to start opening up these crevices and expand them more and more to somehow enable women to achieve their minimum social and economic rights. I completely agree with you that it's devastating for our societies and for our future. We have to get a much greater public awareness of this, and I think the way schooling is conducted is very important. It's not just the fact of schooling, but as the report says, it's the kind of education that you impart, it's the kind of awareness and consciousness that you create, even at the schools and in educational institutions, that makes a huge difference for the future, and in particular, in terms of the recognition of rights of women.
I think one point I'd like to add, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, one point I'd like to add to what Jayati is saying. I think, absolutely, we do have to recognize that we are living through a period when there are serious regressions, at the level of our social norms, discriminatory social norms becoming much stronger in different parts of the world. And they take different forms. I think the sort of restrictions on women's movements and women's ability to sort of be active in the public sphere, are a particularity probably mostly in some of the, Muslim countries, but there are other restrictions and other discriminatory social norms elsewhere. Here in the West, we're constantly bombarded with these very hypersexualized sort of images of women that are also very restrictive in terms of young women's, images of what they should be like and what their, what kind of lives and options they have, that they need to pursue. So I think different societies are dealing, with different kind of restrictions. But specifically speaking about the kind of restrictions that really want to limit and confine women to a kind of very domestic kind of role, which are very real and very palpable in many parts of the world, the actual fact is that often poverty does push women into being in the labor force. I'm here thinking of, even a country that I know a little bit more about, like Iran, where, there have been huge restriction in terms of women's movements, in terms of women being able to be active in the public sphere. And yet the fact that many households, middle-income households, cannot afford to sort of do without at least two incomes in the house has been a factor that has pushed increasing numbers of women into looking for work. So, the disabling economic environment is actually in some ways making it difficult for households to afford that kind of, ideal image of female domesticity. And at the same time, also the fact that we do have in many of these same Muslim countries, women doing very well in terms of their access to education. That, again, I think is something that does push them into becoming, more active in terms of searching for paid work or independence, even though unfortunately, countries in the Middle East, North Africa region are also among those with extremely high unemployment rates among, the young cohort of women who are also very highly educated, which is a real, I think, sort of social disaster.
Thank you very much. I think we have some colleagues in the, some press colleagues in India, and I just wanted to give them an opportunity to ask a question if they had one. And we also have Mr. Iqbal. Ravi, do you have a question? No. Mr. Iqbal, you have a question?
Well, I'm sorry, this is my last question. For your thinking, you need to mute.
Could you please ask India to unmute the microphone?
In India, is there a question from your office, Rebecca? You need to unmute your mic.
Can you hear me, Roberta?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Is there a question from your office?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. We had actually not asked for the floor, but since I have the floor, I do have a question. But I'll make space for our friends from the press that have a question. But I wanted to ask a little bit further. First, thank you for the report, et cetera. It's excellent. Really good recommendations for our work going forward. But particularly with regard to domestic work, I agree with Jayoti that, we can address labor conditions. We can address better regulation, but in order to really understand the conditions of domestic workers who are so isolated and difficult to reach, what kind of methods and new approaches can we take up to actually learn more about the conditions of domestic workers, particularly those who may be vulnerable to exploitative, almost slave-like conditions? How can we reach further into the situation of domestic work, which is really underground and a gross violation of human rights?
Could I respond?
Please do.
Yeah, I completely agree with Rebecca that I think this is a huge, huge area, and in India in particular, it's immense and it's also growing. I think we really have to learn from the example of other countries Ecuador, for example, where they did actually insist on signed contracts. I think that's a very huge thing. And of course, we can say that, well, many of these workers are illiterate and so on and so forth. But at the moment, it's underground largely because workers themselves are not just unaware of their rights, but they're also terrorized into, submission in these very private homes. And placement agencies, which are often responsible for bringing migrant women, do not want the women or the workers in general to be aware of their rights. So we need to have, I would argue, a much better network of formal labor offices specifically for women workers, which actually ensure that every domestic worker has a signed contract, whether or not that worker is illiterate, because it still helps when they can get others to actually do it for them. And then to ensure that those conditions are met in the contract. There will be huge pushback because the middle classes in India are, I would say, aggressive employers in this regard. But nonetheless, I do believe that this is something that can be asked for. It's happening more and more in states like Kerala. And I think it's something it's the thin end of the wedge thing. We can keep pushing on this.
Thank you. Any other questions from your office? Shara, you want to ask as well? Please.
Yeah, I just want to add one point because I spent the whole day here actually with one of the participants who was here for our panel. It was Myrtle Witboy, who's from South Africa, and she's the president of the International Domestic Workers Federation, which is a global organization that brings together 47 domestic worker organizations from 43 countries. And it was a real eye-opener and quite a moving sort of testimony to hear from her, both about the kind of struggles of domestic workers around the world, including in South Africa, as well as the kind of, I think, mobilization that's going on and the energy that's around the sort of domestic workers organization. And I think the importance of making connections in some countries, at least, between domestic workers and other care workers. And this is happening also, in New York. This is one of the most vibrant labor movements that has been around in this city as well. So I think there's a lot of momentum around these issues. But I do think that the fact that many domestic workers are undocumented and, they don't have papers, that they face double and triple discriminations is a particularly important factor to bear in mind and a constraint on the kind of organization and mobilization that can happen. But I think it's definitely there on the agenda, and I hope that this report, as we said in the meeting today, will be another resource in the hands of these organizations that are pushing for recognition of the dignity and the really basic rights of these workers, whose numbers are increasing. Not only in developing countries, but also developed countries, and who really hold up, our societies and sustain the day-to-day living of people as increasing numbers of middle-class women are out there seeking full-time jobs with no proper care services in place.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shara. We know it's very late for you, so we want to wrap up. Mr. Iqbal, did you have a question?
First of all, I'm really thankful to all of you. You have invited me, and I like this occasion, and I love to be with you again.
Thank you.
My question is a little different, but I want to tell you something more, and it's a final question. In few countries, I don't want to mention the name. If you want, you can buy with $200, $100, and $300 small babies, approximately 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and 9-year-old. Very easy to buy. This is also very dangerous. So you have to work on it also. It's my suggestion. Especially, I cannot mention the name because it will be dangerous for me in the future.
Thank you.
I hope you got it what I'm going to tell you. And lastly, thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you very much. This is an important reminder of the extreme forms of exploitation, abuse, and violence which women, girls, and children are exposed to in some parts of our world, and which we must all mobilize very strongly on to end these worst forms and these extreme forms of violence against women and girls. I think we have one question, Caroline, and then... Okay, so we have one question from our colleague from the media. If you can introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hey, my name is Tawisan Meha. I am a reporter from Prasanta. It's a kind of alternative media in Thailand. In the press briefing, it says that 61% of women in service sector experience some form of sexual harassment in the workplace. I'm wondering, do you have any statistics, any figures, like how often do they experience this kind of sexual harassment, and how it affects their promotion in their workplace, like they have to surrender to this kind of harassment to get promotion? Is there any kind of example or story on this? Thanks.
Yes, Shara?
Yeah, I mean, we were looking for some, good evidence on issues of sexual harassment in work, and what we found was, at least for the EU, we found this statistic, which I think is quite shocking. Something like 75% of women in management and higher professional positions, and 61% of women in service sector occupation within the EU have experienced some form of sexual harassment in the workplace in their lifetime. We did try to look for more global data, but we couldn't find that. But at least I think these figures are quite shocking, even though it's about one particular region.
Thank you. Calling from Thai TBS, do you have a question?
Now I'm thinking about maybe a policy or some rules that can protect the women from the something that have to face about sexual harassment or anything else that have to affect on their mind in the workplace. So can we or the international organization can make a progress on this?
I think Shara, our colleague, is asking us what progress can we make to sort of regulate and protect women from all forms of sexual harassment in the workplace?
Well, I think, what's very important, of course, is to kind of see from the ground up, what is actually happening in many countries where the different forms of work are involved. Market women, for example, women working as street traders on the streets, waste pickers, sex workers, they're all exposed to different kinds of harassment, sexual harassment, which I think something needs to be done, and the organizations working with these workers will have a lot of insight into the issues. But as far as sort of global institutions are concerned, if I'm not mistaken, my understanding is that the discussion is also going on at the level of the ILO in terms of thinking about some work in terms of either a recommendation, I believe, on the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace, which should be another tool in the hands of organizations who are actually working on these issues on the ground and with different groups of women workers.
Can I just add to that? In India, we recently passed a bill on sexual harassment at the workplace. The challenge, of course, is implementing it, because it's actually quite a good law. It actually provides for all kinds of different situations and is in fact gender sensitive. It also allows for sexual harassment in either direction, if you see what I mean. But it's dominantly oriented to a workplace as an organization, and it requires every organization to set up a committee that will take in complaints and deal with them, and so on and so forth, and of course sets forward rules for how people should behave in the work environment and so on. The difficulty is, of course, implementing it even for smaller organizations. But more than that, when so many of our workers, and women workers in particular, are self-employed and face the kind of harassment that Shara just mentioned, whether through the policeman on the road or through getting to the place of work or during their work as a self-employed person, and so on. So we need to have a wider vision which will incorporate issues of occupational safety seen specifically from the point of view of the physical safety of women.
Thank you, Jayati. In their office, are there any members of the press who have any questions before we close off our press conference?
Roberta?
You have to unmute, Rebecca.
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me now? No, we have no members of the press are here with us today in this office.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think that, Karen, do you have a question or can we close off? Okay, I just have one question before I ask Francisco to close for us. We speak a lot about transformative work, decent work in the report. What does the report have to say, Shara, about transforming the work, the care work in the home? How does the report, what recommendations does the report make for this, what we call sharing the care and men's role in unpaid work in the context, for example, of our He for She campaign? Are there recommendations on the role of the state in regulating that unpaid work in the household? And do we make recommendations for transformation of culture, household culture and care culture?
I think we're very clear that the transformation of care work obviously has to be sort of thought through in a very context-specific way. I think in many countries where basic, public utilities like accessible water and sanitation are not there, we really need, that's sort of where things need to begin, reducing the drudgery of the unpaid domestic and care work. And here I'm putting together domestic and care work. And in terms of also for many other middle income as well as lower income countries, as I said earlier, the kind of public services, accessible public services can be a very important complement in terms of reducing both the drudgery and the amount of work, care work that's carried out within the homes by women and girls. We do believe that the importance of redistribution of care work between men and women within households is really important. And the specifics around how you kind of transform social norms, I think, are quite challenging. But I think there can be sort of movements in that direction through, even if it's symbolic. The fact that you do have the possibilities of having paternity leave, I know that's not relevant in many countries where those workers who can have access even to maternity leave are a small fraction of the workforce. But still, symbolically and culturally, that can start transforming the norms, social norms around caring. So we kind of don't have any specific sort of messages around how this job can be done, except for the fact that it's something that, is something that women's movements and civil society organizations can be very active around. And we have the kind of possibility of using things like, for example, cash transfer programs to get men more involved in the care work. As you know, there's been a lot of concern around how sometimes these cash transfer programs can reinforce kind of caring work as maternal work by only targeting the transfers to women and making it conditional upon women taking the children to the health clinic and attending, hygiene courses. So some people see the possibility, and the report does say that, it's important to try and expand that lens and to really try and raise the possibilities of including also men as carers in these kind of programs. So I think that's, again, important to bear in mind. But also I think it's important to underline that for a significant number of women who are bringing up children, there are also no men in the household, adult men in the household. So the redistribution of care work within the household is really, really important. But we also have to think about the role of society and the role of sort of public provisioning and public services in being able to help households and women in particular, who are sometimes in charge of bringing up children and earning a living on their own. So I think the two strategies need to be combined.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So can we just pass on to Francisco for a bit of a wrap-up?
Thank you very much, Roberta. First of all, let me congratulate the team for a very timely report. And I think it's very timely for three reasons. One is that this is a very important moment in which we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Beijing Platform. Second, when we are discussing the finance for development process. And third, we are discussing along with our member states the Sustainable Development Goals. So this report provides a number of very important inputs and thoughts for the whole process on how to build an alternative agenda. Also, the report connects very importantly the dimensions of human life and human development. And those are production and reproduction, the economy of the social that we don't see many times very clearly connected, because we either focus on one of those. And it brings back the rights, the human rights, and the women's rights agenda into the equation and connects it with the social and the economic, which I think is extremely relevant. Also, it brings a new dimension to the challenge of growth with inequality. We hear a number of reports talking about the increased wealth that the world is experiencing and the increase in inequalities. But I think this report puts at the center gender inequality, how to tackle it, and of course that would bring very important benefits for the economy overall. And as Professor Ghosh mentioned, probably in no region in the world paradoxes are so clear as they are in Asia Pacific. In Asia Pacific, we have, on the one hand, sustained economic growth for very long periods of time, but very striking inequalities and probably some of the worst outcomes in terms of gender inequality for women. And the data tells us a very contradictory picture in many cases. And I will give an example of this sub-region. Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos have some of the highest female labor participation rates in the world, almost at 80%. But at the same time, when we look at the flip side, the education of women are among the lowest in the world. So what it tells us is that these women are working in very precarious kind of works, in the informal economy most likely, and of course this is worrisome for many reasons, because we are concerned about the quality of work and how this works. And it's also concerning because it somehow neutralizes the potential transformative aspect of work, because work is important not as a means of subsistence, not as a means of securing an income, but it's also very important in terms of transforming the subjective experience with the public space, with transforming relations of powers, with transforming also the negotiations in the private sphere as well. And this takes us to the other side of the coin about reproductive work, and how work is also working in fair terms, work with its transformative potential, with good earnings, with some of the characteristics of formality, can also have a potential transformation in the other sphere. And of course, the challenge is how we transform also men's involvement, because gender equality, in a nutshell, can be described when men and women share equally our responsibilities in both production and reproduction. In terms of the policy options the report offers, I think it's very, very clever in giving us a roadmap and indicating that policies can actually accelerate equality. Sometimes we think about gender equality process in the very long term, especially when we talk about transforming the cultural rules. But this report shows that good policies can transform gender equality, and some good policies, for example, like extending universal health care, can have a very important impact on women, or policies that try to formalize employment can have a very positive impact on women. No, it also reminds us that besides these universal policies, we also need more targeted policies to tackle gender inequality and specific aspects, including those cultural transformations, and that we can show short-term results. So this is a very important in the context of the next step, in the context of not looking at the macroeconomic options as something that can only happen in the long term, but that with appropriate fiscal policies, we can accelerate progress and we can actually deliver results. And it's about countries' priorities, and it's about countries' allocations of budgets and political will. And we hope that this report really has a lot of influence in the policy agenda, because it can really transform some of the important aspects of gender inequality to have clear results by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shara. Thank you very much for being up. I think it must be 12 o'clock at New York time now. Thank you, Charity, for joining us. I think we are talking about transforming the world, transforming economic development, so that women have equal opportunities to participate in, as well as benefit from economic growth, and that growth is sustainable, does not destroy the environment, and contributes to a high quality of life for all. Thank you very much, and members of the press, for joining us. We will be sending out the press release on this tele-brief, I think it's called, and we thank you very much for your participation. Good night, Shara. Good morning, all.
Yeah, good to see you, Shara.
Thank you so much for having us. Lovely to see all of you.
Yes, indeed.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, so you have a question on the Thailand.
Yes. We are stopping recording now, or you still want to?
No. I think there's a question on Thailand.
There's a question on Thailand, and as well as exclusive for the Thai PBS.
Yes,
Both of
Francisco.
you. Yeah.